everyone, and welcome to another video on the 70D camera menu system. In this video I am going to go into a more in-depth into the menus and certain settings and why you would use them. Now I'm going to say beforehand it's quite basic for people who understand the menus and stuff like that, so you may not want to watch this video. So if you don't, please don't watch it now. But if you've no else to do and you want to watch it, then by all means. It will take a little while. I may have to do it over 3 or 4 parts, as to go tell you what every feature does and why I'd use it personally, and why maybe the manual will recommend why you use it. We'll just see what happens. So we'll go to the first wrench and we'll start off at the top. Now the first wrench is, well, the first setting that you get is the image quality, and that is the raw. Let's check if it's still recording. Yeah, and that is the raw. You've got the raw setting and the JPEG setting. Now the raw setting, we've got 3 raw settings. We've got the full 20 megapixel, we've got an 11 megapixel. If we just go here, we've got an 11, that's 20, that's 11, and that's a 5 megapixel. Basically all them are raw files. I usually shoot in the 20 megapixel raw file, but you don't really have to shoot in the 20 megapixel. If you really didn't need a full-size raw file, you could definitely shoot in the medium or the small. I have tested it before and had prints backing up to certain sizes like 20 by 30 and stuff like that. You can't really tell the difference, but to be fair, as hard drives are cheap now, memory cards are cheap, and my computer's so fast, I just shoot large RAW anyway, because it doesn't really slow anything down, and if I do need to print big, I have that quality there. But on the other hand, I do tend to shoot a lot of high ISO shots, and you couldn't print them huge anyway without really degrading your picture. Man, you can still go bigger than you think, but you might not be able to do 50, 40 by 60 or something like that at ISO 3200. Well, you could, but I don't think it'd look too great. And then you've got the JPEG setting. Oh, let me just go back in there. Then you've got the JPEG setting at the bottom. If you're going to shoot JPEG, I recommend you shoot large, the maximum JPEG that you can shoot. But as you can see, my settings are JPEG off and RAW large. And that pretty much explains that menu. You can shoot, if you use the shutter button on the front, you can select your RAW size, and then if you use the wheel on the back, you can select your JPEG size. That's if you want to shoot a JPEG, but I'm happy with just a RAW file. So the next menu down is the VF grid display. This basically enables the grid display through the viewfinder. It's quite handy if you want the rule of thirds. So when you're looking through the shot, you get the lines and you can frame stuff up a lot better on the lines. You can frame them up perfectly in camera. That pretty much explains that. The viewfinder level is this here. I'll just show you that. It's there. I don't want to move the camera, but you can see it's not there. There it is. It's straight now. Look, if I just touch it there. And that's your viewfinder level. So if your tripod doesn't have a viewfinder level, that's a good way of using it. You've only got, by the way, show and hide. Then your beep enable or disable. That is the beep that happens when you press the shutter button on your camera and your camera focuses. This is for the 70D, but it applies to pretty much all cameras. It beeps when it's got focus. If you turn it off, you just get focus, and that's that, and there's no beep. I leave it enabled all the time. Good things and good times where you might not enable it. Hang on, let me just pick up the bloody mic, man. Right, sorry about that. Times where you may not enable the viewfinder beep is when you're in a church, near vicar, well, in a church full stop. If you're doing a wedding, it's quite handy to disable it. And when speeches are taking place and stuff, that way nobody hears your camera beeping. But as a rule, I do leave it on. I like it on. I like it to be on. Next one is basically what that does is, if I try to take a picture now, see how it won't let me? I'm trying to press the shutter button and it will not let me take a picture. And that's because there's no card in the camera. If I go change that setting to on, watch this. My camera's not going to focus, by the way, but let me just turn the... Well, let's take the lens cap off. And let's take one. And you should see there's no card in the camera, but can you see the picture it's just taken? You never want your camera to do that, because you could, in reality, you could go to a job and start taking 50 pictures and then come to press play, like now, watch, and then your camera's going to say, no card in camera. But every time you take a picture, you will get, look, a preview, look, I'll do another. This time you see my hand there. So you're thinking, I mean, luckily that's saying no card in camera. That's a fail-safe, but some cameras don't say that. Or if they do, it's very small, and when you're taking pictures, you don't really realise. So I would personally, there's no reason in the world why you'd want to do that. So now, hang on a minute. No, that's the beep, isn't it? Silly. I've disabled my beep now, look. We'll get there in a minute. Now, I'm sorry, I'm knocking buttons because I'm stretching over so that I don't knock the camera for the... there you go. Now, if we try to take a picture now, you'll see that it won't let me take one, and that's where you want to leave it. End of story. There's no other reason why you'd really want it to take a picture, I wouldn't have thought. Then you've got the image review time, which is, if we press OK on here, you've got, that's the amount of time that your image will stay on the screen. That's pretty much that explained. Press the menu button, go across to the second menu. Sorry, I'm just checking focus. First menu we come to is the lens correction, so let's go into that. Now you'll see this time that I've got, it's already enabled, and it's saying it's for a 50mm f1.4 USM, and I've got chromatic aberration, peripheral illumination enable, and chromatic aberration enable. Now let me break that down for you, which I didn't do in my previous video. What that is, basically when you take pictures on certain lenses, well on every lens, but at certain apertures and stuff like that, the lens will what you call vignette in the corners, so you'll end up with dark edges, and you'll get like a green or a pink fringing round certain objects. You mainly see it when you zoom in, but some lenses, I know the Canon 17-85, when you shoot weddings, if you're at 17mm at 3.5 or f4, it stands out like a sore thumb. This will take care of that, but hang on, there is a catch. It will take care of it if you're a JPEG shooter. That only takes effect on JPEGs. So if you're not a JPEG shooter, it means nothing. Now, don't get me wrong, you can enable it in Lightroom or in Camera Raw or in your editing software. They do have that peripheral illumination there. But if you're a JPEG shooter and you want to do it without messing or any clicks, if you've got a Canon lens, it doesn't work on Tamron and stuff like that. If you've got a Canon lens, then by all means have it there, and then if you ever shoot a JPEG, it'll fix it for you. And that's that. That explains that. Flash control, quite a bit more of an advanced menu now. Now I'm going to cover this to the best of my knowledge, but I haven't got an external flash, and I'll talk a little bit about external flash and a little bit about the internal flash, although I've not used it for a while. But the first one is flash firing enable, and you'll see we've got enable and disable, which is pretty basically if you disable it now, the onboard flash on the camera will not fire. If you had an external flash, that wouldn't fire either. A good opportunity to use this is, and most cameras and flashes of default enabled, basically you can put your onboard, your big flash on top, disable it but turn your flash on, and you'll get your AF assist beam from your flash. So if you're in low light and for any reason you'd want an hand focusing, say you're in like now in my house, it's quite cloudy. I know it doesn't look bad, but let me just turn the light off. I mean, it's only acting as a bit of fill today, to be honest. I could use it in here now to help grab focus quicker, but I don't want any flash. It's just a natural light picture. So that's a good thing to know. If you've got off-camera triggers like YN622Cs, which I have got, you can tell the flashes not to fire. So if you want to do some off-camera, let's say you're setting your lights up or you're setting your ambient reading up first before you want your flashes to go off, you can tell your flash not to fire, and then when you're happy, you just come into here, you quickly come into here, and then you go to your flash control, and then you enable it. Next menu down, evaluative. If we click the set button here, we've got evaluative or average. Basically, that is the way your flash decides on its exposure in ETTL. When it is set, I mean, I'm not going to go deep into this because it would be an all new topic, but basically you want to leave it in evaluative anyway, and that'll just evaluate the overall scene. And then you'll take a picture, and if your flash is too bright, use your flash exposure compensation. This is your flash AV sync. This is for your sync speed when you are, sorry, I'm just moving, I don't know if you'll hear that shuffling. This is your flash sync speed when you are in aperture priority or one of the automatic modes. You can tell it to lock your shutter at 2/50th of a second, so you can freeze action, or you can tell it to go all the way down to a 60th of a second, so that when you're shooting at night outside, if there's any lights or out like that, your camera will drag the shutter a bit at 60th of a second and try taking a bit of that ambient. I just leave it on auto because I don't use onboard camera flash anyway, I use off camera. But there's a little explanation of that. Or we can fix it at 2/50th of a second, but that means every time the flash is up that your shutter speed's 2/50th of a second, and you don't really want that. Menu. Next one round, we'll go to the built-in flash. Now, these built-in flash settings are the same as you'd get if you had an external flash. Yeah, so these settings here will be the same if you had an external connected. So you've got ETTL2, and if you press set, you've got manual. ETTL2, basically, when you take a shot with your flash on, let's say you take a shot and it's a little bit dark, and you want to use a bit of flash, you can turn your flash on, and in ETTL your flash will try give you the appropriate exposure to fill in those shadows and make the exposure correct. That's ETTL, end of. Right, if we go into manual, you'll see when we go into manual we get a new setting underneath where we can adjust the flash output. I mean, this is a 70D, so you can use the screen or use the wheel, but I don't want the camera to move. Now, I don't know if you know this, but each one of those white numbers, the actual, it's three bars along. It's 3 bars along, means that it's one full stop. So that's fully down. So if I go 1, 2, 3, I've just turned the flash up 1 full stop. If I go 1 click, I've turned it up 1/3 of a stop. If I go 2, I've turned it up 2/3. If I go 3, I'm a full stop. That's it. That's your obviously, if we go back to the top and put it in ETTL, you don't get that. What you do get though is, I'm knocking the wrong buttons. What you do get is first curtain and second curtain. First curtain, I'll just explain it to you. First curtain, basically, let's say you're taking an exposure that's 10 seconds long. I'm going to use 10 seconds because it's easier for you to understand. That's 10 seconds long. What you do is, when you press the shutter, your flash will fire, and then your shutter will stay open for 10 seconds and then it'll close. And that's first curtain. That's the one that you use 95% of the time. But let's say it's getting, let's say you're taking a 1 second exposure, but you're photographing somebody, and at 1 second, and the background's really bright. So what you could do, you could tell your shutter to open on the second curtain, your flash to fire on the second curtain. What that will do is, let's go back to 10 seconds just to make it a bit easier. At the end, when you press your shutter button, your shutter will open, no flash, and just before the shutter closes, the flash will fire. And that's rear curtain sync. Some people call it first curtain, second curtain, or rear curtain sync, I think they call it, or something like that. But that's second curtain sync. And like I say, you can use it in very low light. If you're shooting portraits in low light and you're dragging your shutter to take in the nice sun and the ambient, but you're using flash to light your subject, you could tell your flash to fire at the end of the exposure, so it'd eliminate any movement on your subject. That's it, we won't go on about it for too long. And then you've got your exposure compensation. That is your flash exposure compensation. You can access it from your flash faster than going into all them three menus. What that does is, if you take a shot in ETTL and you think, oh, it's a bit bright, is that? The flash is a little bit harsh, you can say, no camera, or whatever you want to call it, go a little bit darker please, or a little bit brighter, and the camera will go a little bit brighter or a little bit darker. Now, the wireless function I'm not going to cover on this video. I have got videos on the wireless function. If you look for YN622C reviews, it's in there. But if you haven't got wireless anyway, there's no need to know it. And if you do get some YN622Cs or wireless triggers, go watch them videos, and I've already covered it anyway. So external flash function settings, I mean, there's no flash connected, but when you do it, because you know what the others are now, you'd understand that also. You do have some custom functions at the bottom, but it only applies when you've got a big external flash connected. So I won't cover that now. If you want me to do a video on that, please send me an email again, and I'll do a video on that. But we are just trying to stick to the basic camera menus for this tutorial. Red eye reduction is, oh, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. Red eye reduction, I've got it on enable, but to be honest, it don't work anyway. It's crap. And if you use on camera flash, then you'll get red eye. You need to remove it in post. And then you've got your mirror lockup. What your mirror lockup is, basically, if you turn it on, I'm pressing the wrong button, you see, I'm stretching over the camera, and if you turn it on, your mirror, when you press your shutter button, your mirror will lock up inside your camera and it won't go back down. So like when you take a picture and you hear it go up and back down, it'll go up and not back down. Then you can clean your sensor. But it's quite an advanced tutorial, although I think I have done a video on how to clean a sensor, and that is where you would use your mirror lockup. Menus again now. And we'll go across to the next wrench. Right, so I'll just go at the top. So now we're on exposure compensation. I'll just go back so you can see that. That's the top wrench. And again, that's used for when you're using your camera in automatic. In any one of the, I don't mean the green automatic, I mean in aperture priority or TV, or I don't know if it works in P, I think it does. I don't use P, so I don't know, but I'm assuming it will. That's basically, again, when you've took a picture, say you've took this picture of this camera now in aperture priority or at f2.8, and you thought, oh, it's a little bit dark, you can just turn it up and down. So it's not flash compensation, it's the same thing, does the same thing, but it's the actual exposure compensation. So you've got two, which Nikon don't seem to do, but you've got an exposure compensation and then you've got a flash compensation. So you need to distinguish the two and understand the two. But they do the same thing. If you turn it up, it'll make the camera get the picture brighter. If you're a bit stuck on what I'm saying, I highly recommend that you take some pictures with no flash, obviously, and in AV, use AV, and then if your image is too dark, use exposure compensation to make the camera make it get brighter or darker. Then when you understand that, then you can put your flash on, your external. I even think it works with the internal, I'm not sure, I think it does. And then you need to remember there's flash exposure compensation and exposure compensation. ISO speed settings I don't really mess with because I use manual ISO, but in here you can tell it to range from 100 to 256,000, or you can tell it, if you go click on this second range down, I'll just come away, I can move over to the minimum ISO and say, no thank you, I never want my camera to go above the, I don't want my camera to go above, I don't know why it's saying 256 because I have changed it, but let me just have a look at that. No, it hasn't changed. I have to press OK here, look, there you go. Right, there you go, you got to touch the screen. Now, the ISO settings that the camera will give me is ISO 100 to 128,000. That's pretty easy. See, the thing of it is, I know I'd never use 256,000, so I don't want to see it, and now I can't see it. The auto ISO range is what it says, if I press OK now, you can set the minimum ISO, or so I could say the minimum ISO is 200 and the maximum, you see I've got it at 132, but I don't use automatic ISO, but if I did, the camera wouldn't go any higher than 3200. So if it needed an higher ISO to give me the exposure, the camera would sit there flashing at me. Let me just check what time we're on. The camera would sit there flashing at me, and that's that. Then you've got your minimum shutter speed. You can set the minimum shutter speed, but again, it only affects automatic shooting. But you can go in there and say, don't give me any slow shutter speeds than 60th of a second, please. So when the camera's in automatic, you know that you're not going to get a blurred image, or you're going to have a lot less chance. Auto lighting optimizer. Just click OK there. We're in the menus now. What that does is basically it enhances your shadows and your highlights, and it automatically, it's like you importing a raw file into Lightroom and putting a little bit of shadows on, you know, on the plus side, and just overall giving the image a little tweak. Now, I don't recommend you use it. If you're a JPEG shooter, it's up to you. You could use it, because if you're delivering your images straight to the client, then I could see why it'd be a good thing, because it enhances your shadows and gives it a little tweak. But for RAW, I wouldn't use it. And you have 3 different settings: high, medium and low. White balance, automatic. My recommendations are AWB 9, well, even 100% of the time, not 100, but 90% of the time. Because I shoot RAW anyway, so if any reason I came home and I looked at all my images and they were all green, because even if I had left it on tungsten white balance and went out and shot a wedding and left it in tungsten white balance all day, because it's a RAW file, I could just change it later on. But if you're going to shoot JPEG, I'd choose the irrelevant icon. So if you're out in the sun, choose the sunny. If you're in the shade, choose the shade. If you're in tungsten, choose tungsten. If you're using your flash, use flash. And do it like that. This icon here is a custom. Let's go to it so you can see, because I'm pointing. That there is your custom white balance. Basically, I'm not going to go too much into that, but if you've got a grey card, you can take a picture of a grey card, select that, go to the next icon down, which I'm going to show you in a minute, select custom white balance and choose the grey card as your white balance, and you'll get a perfect white balance. Bearing in mind you've got to get the exposure correct first. So let's say you were doing a portrait under a tree, you'd get your exposure perfect, so you were happy with it, then you'd get your grey card, get your subject to hold the grey card, go as close as you can to the grey card, take a picture of it, don't change your settings on your camera, but you've already set them, and then you select this for your white balance, and then you go to the next icon down and select custom white balance, and you select that grey card image, and that's it. You'll have a perfect white balance. I'm going to end this video after these next couple of icons now, as it's going to stop any minute anyway, and we'll do it in some other parts. This here, again, is only really good if you shoot JPEG, because if you shoot JPEG, it shifts the white balance. So if you take a picture and you think, it's alright, but it's a little bit cool, I'd like to warm it up a bit,